All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, try and stay warm, and jump back into our book. Welcome back. This is our third night of reading from Don Quixote, everyone's favorite aging chuny Spaniard. And yesterday was a bit of a divergence from what we might have expected. Yes, things started out pretty well. The adventures of our well-meaning gentlemen were well and goodly underway, but part way through the climactic clash between our gallant knight and the headstrong coachman guard rather abruptly cut off, as our narrator found that he no longer had the original source material to work with and had to go hunting. And through the course of that, we discovered that Don Quixote was rather, at least partly, widely spread around the story of, and he was picked up by a rather maligned Arab author. And that was an interesting twist. As Akimo said, the meta text layer was a little surprising. It was certainly welcome. It's well done. It's got that little bit of almost sarcastic backbiting level to it that I love to see in a narrator. So when you're gonna be meta, this is the way to do it. So I'll accept it. And it adds an extra little bit of a wrinkle to things, because now we certainly know, as this is a history gleaned from multiple different perspectives at this point, that our narrator and the story that's being told may not be quite all the story there is. And there may be some more developments as we go, and things that are lost and given up for lost. Somehow my YouTube monitor is about 3 minutes behind. That was interesting. I just now saw the door opening and the zoom there we've got. So, fun. If it's executed well is the key caveat there. That said, this is one of the first and best preserved examples of metafiction, so I should certainly hope it holds up. It may set the standard that it can be either surpassed or not quite reached, as the case may be. Alright, well, I am not quite back at 100%, so I may have to dial back the enthusiasm on some of our reading tonight. I know, it's alright. We'll somehow survive. It'll be alright. Don Quixote just may not be quite so enthusiastic. Such as it is. I know. Alright, so let's go ahead and shift our position now back to our reading stance and get back into the book, because I don't know about you, but through much of the area around here it is blisteringly, bitingly cold, so I need something to take my mind off that. So how about a little bit of gallantry and gallivanting with Don Quixote, resuming from chapter 13, in which is ended the story of the shepherdess Marcella, with other incidents. Progress bar, go away. But hardly had day begun to show itself through the balconies of the east, when 5 of the 6 goatherds came to rouse Don Quixote and tell him that if he was still of a mind to go and see the famous burial of Chrysostom, they would bear him company. Don Quixote, who desired nothing better, rose and ordered Sancho to saddle and panel at once, which he did with all dispatch, and with the same they all set out forthwith. They had not gone a quarter of a league when, at the meeting of 2 paths, they saw coming towards them some 6 shepherds, dressed... Oh, we're having a blip. Hang on. Oop, I'm gonna get back here. Hang tight. Having some connectivity snafu kerfuffles. Dropping some frames here and there. Funny, the blizzard shouldn't have anything to do with any sort of connectivity. Come on. It's only a foot of snow. Please. Alright. I think we are settled back down. Alright. Yep, I think we are no longer buffering. Alright, cool. Let's rock it. They had not gone a quarter of a league when, at the meeting of 2 paths, they saw coming towards them some 6 shepherds, dressed in black sheepskins and with their heads crowned with garlands of cypress and bitter oleander. Each of them carried a stout holly staff in his hand, and, along with them, there came 2 men of quality on horseback, in handsome traveling dress, with 3 servants on foot accompanying them. Courteous salutations were exchanged on meeting, and, inquiring one of the other which way each party was going, they learned that all were bound for the scene of the burial. So they went on all together. Oh yeah, that was a doozy of a night. We gave an honest effort of it, but by the time we finally gave up, it was almost about halfway through our time anyway, so we tried to get a little bit of yap in, but I think between all the frames that were dropping, we may have had about... It was more of a PowerPoint show than a stream. One of those on horseback, addressing his companion, said to him, "It seems to me, Signor Vivaldo, that we may reckon as well spent the delay we shall incur in seeing this remarkable funeral. For remarkable it cannot but be judging by the strange things these shepherds have told us, of both the dead shepherd and homicide shepherdess." "So I think too," replied Vivaldo, "and I would delay not to say a day, but 4, for the sake of seeing it." Don Quixote asked them what it was they had heard of Marcella and Chrysostom. The traveler answered that the same morning they met these shepherds, and seeing them dressed in this mournful fashion, they had asked what the reason for their appearance in appearing in such a guise, which one of them gave, describing the strange behavior and beauty of a shepherdess named Marcella, and the loves of many who courted her, together with the death of that Chrysostom to whose burial they were going. In short, he repeated all that Pedro had related to Don Quixote. This conversation dropped, and another was commenced by him who was called Vivaldo, asking Don Quixote what was the reason that led him to go armed in that fashion in a country so peaceful. To which Don Quixote replied, "The pursuit of my calling does not allow or permit me to go in any other fashion. Easy life, enjoyment, and repose were invented for soft courtiers, but toil, unrest, and arms were invented and made for those alone whom the world calls knights errant, of whom I, though unworthy, am the least of all." The instant they heard this, all set him down as mad, and the better to settle the point and discover what kind of madness his was, Vivaldo proceeded to ask him what knights errant meant. "Have not your worships," replied Don Quixote, "read the annals and histories of England, in which are recorded the famous deeds of King Arthur, whom we in our popular Castilian invariably call King Artus, with regard to whom it is in ancient tradition, and commonly received all over that kingdom of Great Britain, that this king did not die, but was changed by magic art into a raven. And that in process of time he is to return to reign and recover his kingdom and scepter, for which reason it cannot be proved that from that time to this any Englishman ever killed a raven. Well then, in the time of this good king that famous order of chivalry of the Knights of the Round Table was instituted, and the amour of Don Lancelot and the lake with the Queen Guinevere occurred. Precisely as is there related, the go-between and confidant therein being the highly honourable Dame Quintanona, whence came that ballad so well known and widely spread in our Spain. Oh, never surely was there knight so served by hand of dame, as served was he, Sir Lancelot hight, when he from Britain came. Yeah, thanks, Don Quixote. Spoilers much, thank you. Jeez. With all the sweet and delectable course of his achievements in love and war handed down from that time, then, this order of chivalry went on extending and spreading itself over many and various parts of the world, and in it, famous and renowned for their deeds, were the mighty Amadis of Gaul, with all his sons and descendants to the 5th generation, and the valiant Felixmart of Persania, and the never sufficiently praised Tirante el Blanco. And in our own days almost, we have seen and heard and talked with the invincible knight Don Bellianus of Greece. This, then, sirs, is to be a knight-errant, and what I have spoken of is the order of his chivalry, of which, as I have already said, I, though a sinner, have made profession, and what the aforesaid knights professed, that same do I profess. And so I go through these solitudes and wilds seeking adventures, resolved in soul to oppose my arm and person to the most perilous that fortune may offer me in aid of the weak and needy. By these words of his, the travelers were able to satisfy themselves of Don Quixote's being out of his senses, and of the form of madness that overmastered him, at which they felt the same astonishment that all felt on first becoming acquainted with it. And Vivaldo, who was a person of great shrewdness and of a lively temperament, in order to beguile the short journey which they said was required to reach the mountain, the scene of the burial, sought to give him an opportunity of going on with his absurdities. So he said to him, "It seems to me, Signor Knight-errant, that your worship has made choice of one of the most austere professions in the world, and I imagine even that of the Carthusian monks is not so austere." "As austere as it may perhaps be," replied our Don Quixote, but so necessary for the world I am very much inclined to doubt. For, if the truth is to be told, the soldier who executes what his captain orders does no less than the captain himself who gives the order. My meaning is, that churchmen, in peace and quiet, pray to heaven for the welfare of the world, but we soldiers and knights carry into effect what they pray for, defending it with the might of our arms and the edge of our swords, not under shelter, but in the open air, a target for the intolerable rays of the sun in summer and the piercing frosts of winter. Thus are we God's ministers on earth, and the arms by which his justice is done therein. And, as the business of war and all that relates and belongs to it cannot be conducted without exceeding great sweat, toil, and exertion, it follows that those who make it their profession have undoubtedly more labour than those who in tranquil peace and quiet are engaged in praying to God to help the weak. I do not mean to say, nor does it enter into my thoughts, that the knight-errant's calling is as good as that of the monk in his cell. I would merely infer from what I endure myself, that it is beyond a doubt a more laborious and a more belaboured one, a hungrier and thirstier, a wretcheder, raggeder, and lousier, for there is no reason to doubt that the knights-errant of yore endured much hardship in the course of their lives. And if some of them, by the might of their arms, did rise to be emperors, in faith it cost them dear in the matter of blood and sweat. And if those who attained to that rank had not had magicians and sages to help them, they would have been completely balked in their ambition and disappointed in their hopes. That is my own opinion, replied the traveller, but one thing among many others seems to me very wrong in knights-errant, and that is that when they find themselves about to engage in some mighty and perilous adventure, in which there is manifest danger of losing their lives, they never, at the moment of engaging in it, think of commending themselves to God, as is the duty of every good Christian in like peril, instead of which they commend themselves to their ladies, with as much devotion as if these were their gods, a thing which seems to me to save us somewhat of heathenism. Sir, answered Don Quixote, that cannot be on any count omitted, and the knight-errant would be disgraced who acted otherwise. For it is usual and customary in knight-errantry that the knight-errant, who, on engaging in any great feat of arms, has his lady before him, should turn his eyes toward her softly and lovingly, as though with them entreating her to favour and protect him in the hazardous venture he is about to undertake. And even though no one hear him, he is bound to say certain words between his teeth, commending himself to her with all his heart. And of this we have innumerable instances in the histories. Nor is it to be supposed from this that they are to omit commending themselves to God, for there will be time and opportunity for doing so while they are engaged in their task. For all that, answered the traveller, I feel some doubt still, because often I have read how words will arise between two knights-errant, and from one thing to another it comes about that their anger kindles, and they wheel their horses round and take a good stretch of the field. And then, without any more ado, at the top of their speed, they come to the charge, and in mid-career they are wont to commend themselves to their ladies. And what commonly comes of the encounter is that one falls over the haunches of his horse, pierced through and through by his antagonist's lance, and as for the other, it is only by holding on to the mane of his horse that he can help falling to the ground. But I know not how the dead man had time to commend himself to God in the course of such rapid work as this. It would have been better if those words which he spent in commending himself to his lady in the midst of his career had been devoted to his duty and obligation as a Christian. Moreover, it is my belief that all knights-errant have not ladies to commend themselves to, for they are not all in love. That is impossible, said Don Quixote. I say it is impossible that there could be a knight-errant without a lady, because to such it is as natural and proper to be in love as to the heavens to have stars. Most certainly, no history has been seen in which there is to be found a knight-errant without an amour, and for the simple reason that without one he would be held no legitimate knight but a bastard, and one who had gained entrance into the stronghold of the said knighthood not by the door, but over the wall, like a thief and a robber. Nevertheless, said the traveller, if I remember rightly, I think I have read that Don Galaor, the brother of the valiant Amadis of Gaul, never had any special lady to whom he might commend himself, and yet he was not the less esteemed, and he was very stout, and a very stout and famous knight. To which our Don Quixote made answer, Sir, one solitary swallow does not make summer. Moreover, I know that knight was in secret very deeply in love. Besides which, that way of falling in love with all that took his fancy was a natural propensity, which he could not control. But, in short, it is very manifest that he had one alone, whom he made mistress of his will, to whom he commended himself very frequently and very secretly, for he prided himself on being a reticent knight. Then if it be essential that every knight-errant should be in love, said the traveller, it may be fairly supposed that your worship is so. as you are of the order. And if you do not pride yourself on being as reticent as Don Galeor, I entreat you as earnestly as I can, in the name of all this company and in my own, to inform us of the name, country, rank, and beauty of your lady. For she will esteem herself fortunate if all the world knows that she is loved and served by such a knight as your worship seems to be. At this, Don Quixote heaved a deep sigh and said, I cannot say positively whether my sweet enemy is pleased or not that the world should know I serve her. I can only say, in answer to what has been so courteously asked of me, that her name is Dulcinea, her country El Toboso, a village of La Mancha. Her rank must be at least that of a princess, since she is my queen and lady, and her beauty superhuman, since all the impossible and fanciful attributes of beauty which the poets apply to their ladies are verified in her. For her hairs are gold, her forehead Elysian fields, her eyebrows rainbows, her eyes suns, her cheeks roses, her lips coral, her teeth pearls, her neck alabaster, her bosom marble, her hands ivory, her fairness snow. And what modesty conceals from sight such, I think and imagine, as rational reflection can only extol, not compare. We should like to know her lineage, race, and ancestry, said Vivaldo. To which Don Quixote replied, She is not of the ancient Roman Curtii, Kai, or Scipios, nor of the modern Colonias, or Orsini, nor of the Moncavas, or Requesens, or of Catalonia, nor yet of the Rebellas of Villanovas, or of Valencia, Palafoxes, Nutas, Rocobertis, Corellas, Lunas, Alagones, Urias, Forces, or Gureas of Aragon, Ceres, Manriques, Mendozas, or Guzmans of Castile, Alcastros, Pallas, or Meneses of Portugal. But she is of those of El Toboso of La Mancha, a lineage that, though modern, may furnish a source of gentle blood for the most illustrious families of the ages that are yet to come. And this let none dispute with me save on the condition that Zerbino placed at the foot of the trophy of Orlando's arms, saying, These let none move, who dareth not his might with Roland prove. That was a laundry list of names. Thank you for the exquisite name drop, Don Quixote. I certainly was not prepared for that. Although mine is of the Catropines of Laredo, said the traveller, I will not venture to compare it with that of El Toboso of La Mancha, though, to tell the truth, no such surname has until now ever reached my ears. Nope, we're having a little bit more buffering. Hang tight. Alright, I think we are done with that little bit. So, let's continue on. What? Said Don Quixote. Has that never reached them? Oh, well, okay. Spoke too soon. Hang tight. Hang on. Hang on. Alright, I think we are stable again. The rest of the party went along listening with great attention to the conversation of the pair, and even the very goatherds and shepherds perceived how exceedingly out of his wits our Don Quixote was. Sancho Panza alone thought that what his master said was the truth. Knowing who he was, and having known him from his birth, and all that he felt any difficulty in believing was that about the fair Dulcinea del Toboso, because neither any such name nor any such princess had ever come to his knowledge, though he lived so close to El Toboso. They were going along, conversing in this way, when they saw descending a gap between two high mountains some 20 shepherds, all clad in sheepskins of black wool, and crowned with garlands, which, as afterwards appeared, were some of them of yew, some of cypress. 6 of the number were carrying a bier, covered with a great variety of flowers and branches. On seeing which, one of the goatherds said, "Those who come there are the bearers of Chrysostom's body, and the foot of that mountain is the place where he ordered them to bury him." They therefore made haste to reach the spot, and did so by the time those who came had laid the bier upon the ground. And 4 of them, with sharp pickaxes, were digging a grave by the side of a hard rock. They greeted each other courteously. And then Don Quixote and those who accompanied him turned to examine the bier, and on it, covered with flowers, they saw a dead body in the dress of a shepherd, to all appearances of one of 30 years of age, and showing even in death that in life he had been of comely features and gallant bearing. Around him on the bier itself were laid some books, and several papers open and folded, and those who were looking on as well as those who were opening the grave, and all the others who were there preserved a strange silence, until one of those who had borne the body said to another, "Observe carefully, Ambrosio, if this is the place Chrysostom spoke of, since you are anxious that what he directed in his will should be so strictly complied with." "This is the place," answered Ambrosio, "for in it many a time did my poor friend tell me the story of his hard fortune. Here it was, he told me, that he saw for the first time that mortal enemy of the human race, and here, too, for the first time he declared to her his passion, as honourable as it was devoted. And here it was that at last Marcella ended by scorning and rejecting him, so as to bring the tragedy of his wretched life to a close. Here, in memory of misfortune so great, he desired to be laid in the bowels of eternal oblivion." Then, turning to Don Quixote and the travellers, he went on to say, "That body, sirs, on which you are looking with compassionate eyes, was the abode of a soul on which heaven bestowed a vast share of its riches. That is the body of Chrysostom, who was unrivalled in wit, unequalled in courtesy, unapproached in gentle bearing, a phoenix in friendship, generous without limit, grave without arrogance, first in all that constitutes goodness, and second to none in buffering." Second to none, yep. Second to none. All right, hang tight. I'm still seeing dropping frames, but I think it is. We can chalk this one up to the weather. It's gonna be a little rough. We'll hang tight though. Luckily, we're not really on any firm schedule on when we finish this book. We're gonna take our time. So if we don't get a whole lot done, we don't get a whole lot done. It's not the end of the world. Much buffering. Oh, alright. I think we might be done dropping frames. Hopefully. Maybe. We'll see. Alright. I think we're stable. We'll run with this while we can. In short, first in all that constitutes goodness, and second to none in all that makes up misfortune. He loved deeply, he was hated, he adored, he was scorned, he wooed a wild beast, he pleaded with marble, and he pursued the wind, he cried to the wilderness, he served ingratitude, and for reward was made the prey of death in the mid-course of life, cut short by a shepherdess whom he sought to immortalize in the memory of man. As these papers, which you see could fully prove, had he not commanded me to consign them to the fire after having consigned his body to the earth. You would deal with them more harshly and cruelly than their owner themselves, said Vivaldo, for it is neither right nor proper to do the will of one who enjoins what is wholly unreasonable. It would not have been reasonable in Augustus Caesar had he permitted the directions left by the divine Mantuan in his will to be carried into effect, so that, Signor Ambrosio, while you consign your friend's body to the earth, you should not consign his writings to oblivion. For, if he gave the order in bitterness of heart, it is not right that you should irrationally obey it. On the contrary, by granting life to those papers, let the cruelty of Marcella live forever, to serve as a warning in ages to come, to all men to shun and avoid falling into like danger. Or I, and all of us who have come here know already the story of this your love-stricken and heartbroken friend. And we know, too, your friendship, and the cause of his death, and the directions he gave at the close of his life, from which sad story may be gathered how great was the cruelty of Marcella, the love of Chrysostom, and the loyalty of your friendship, together with the end awaiting those who pursue rashly the path that insane passion opens to their eyes. Last night we learned the death of Chrysostom, and that he was to be buried here, and out of curiosity and pity we left our direct road and resolved to come and see with our eyes that which, when heard of, had so moved our compassion. And in consideration of that compassion, and our desire to prove it, if we might by condolence, we beg you, excellent Ambrosio, or at least I on my own account entreat you, that instead of burning those papers, you allow me to carry away some of them. And without waiting for the shepherd's answer, he stretched out his hand, and took up some of those that were nearest to him. Seeing which, Ambrosio said, Out of courtesy, signor, I will grant your request, as to those you have taken, but it is idle to expect me to abstain from burning the remainder. Vivaldo, who was eager to see what the papers contained, opened one of them at once, and saw that its title was Lay of Despair. Ambrosio, hearing it, said, That is the last paper the unhappy man wrote, and that you may see, signor, to what an end his misfortunes brought him. Read it, so that you may be heard. For you will have time enough for that while we are waiting for the grave to be dug. I will do so very willingly, said Vivaldo, and as all the bystanders were equally eager, they gathered round him, and he, reading in a loud voice, found that it ran as follows. Brings us to the end of chapter 13 there, as we cover the approach to the funeral. And looking at this first picture, it looks like things are not going to go terribly well at and around the funeral. So we'll see how that goes. All right, continuing on with Chapter 14, wherein are inserted the despairing verses of the dead shepherd, together with other incidents not looked for. The Lay of Chrysostom. Since thou dost in thy cruelty desire the ruthless rigor of thy tyranny, from tongue to tongue, from land to land proclaimed, the very hell will I constrain to lend. This stricken breast of mine deep notes of woe, to serve my need of fitting utterance. And as I strive to body forth the tale of all I suffer, all that thou hast done, forth shall the dread voice roll, and bear along shreds from my vitals torn for greater pain. Then listen, not to dulcet harmony, but to a discord wrung by mad despair. Out of this bosom's depths of bitterness, to ease my heart and plant a sting in thine. The lion's roar, the fierce wolf's savage howl, the horrid hissing of the scaly snake. The awesome cries of monsters yet unnamed, the crow's ill-boding croak, the hollow moan of wild winds wrestling with the restless sea, the wrathful bellow of the vanquished bull, the plaintive sobbing of the widowed dove, the envied owl's sad note, the wail of woe that rises from the dreary choir of hell, commingled in one sound and confusing sense. Let all these come to aid my soul's complaint. From pain like mine demands new modes of song. All right, no wonder Marcella turned this guy down. It's a bit of a downer. No echoes of that discord shall be heard, where Father Tagus rolls, or on the banks of olive-bordered Betis, to the rocks, or in deep caverns shall my plaint be told. And by a lifeless tongue, in living words, or in dark valleys, or on lonely shores, where neither foot of man nor sunbeam falls, or in among the poison-breathing swarms of monsters nourished by the sluggish Nile, for, though it be to solitudes remote, the hoarse, vague echoes of my sorrows sound. Thy matchless cruelty, my dismal fate, shall carry them to all the spacious world. Disdain hath power to kill, and patience dies slain by suspicion, be it false or true, and deadly is the force of jealousy. Long absence makes of life a dreary void. No hope of happiness can give repose to him that ever fears to be forgot, and death inevitable waits in hall. But I, by some strange miracle, live on, a prey to absence, jealousy, disdain, racked by suspicion as by certainty, forgotten, left to feed my flame alone, and while I suffer thus, there comes no ray of hope to gladden me athwart the gloom, nor do I look for it in my despair, but rather, clinging to a cureless woe, all hope do I abjure for evermore. No wonder he wanted all this burned. Can there be hope where fear is? Were it well, when far more certain are the grounds of fear, ought I to shut mine eyes to jealousy, if through 1,000 heart wounds it appears? Who would not give free access to distrust, seeing disdain unveiled and bitter change? All his suspicions turned to certainties, and the fair truth transformed into a lie. O fierce tyrant of the realms of love, O jealousy, put chains upon these hands, and bind me with thy strongest cord, disdain. But woe is me, triumphant over all my sufferings, drown the memory of you. And now I die, and since there is no hope of happiness for me in life or death, still to my fantasy I'll fondly cling. I'll say that he is wise who loveth well, and that the soul most free is that most bound in thraldom to the ancient tyrant love. I'll say that she who is mine enemy, in that fair body hath as fair a mind, and that her coldness is but my desert, and that by virtue of the pain he sends, love rules his kingdom with a gentle sway. Thus, self-deluding and in bondage sore, and wearing out the wretched shred of life to which I am reduced by her disdain, I'll give this soul and body to the winds, all hopeless of a crown of bliss in store. Thou, whose injustice hath supplied the cause that makes me quit the weary life I loathe, as by this wounded bosom thou canst see how willingly thy victim I become, let not my death, if haply worth a tear, cloud the clear heaven that dwells in thy bright eyes. I would not have thee expiate in aught the crime of having made my heart thy prey, but rather let thy laughter gaily ring, and prove my death to be thy festival. Fool that I am to bid thee, well I know thy glory gains by my untimely end. I've read manifestos that were less wandering and indulgent as this. Yikes. And now it is the time. From hell's abyss, come thirsting Tantalus, come Sisyphus, heaving the cruel stone, come Titius, with vulture and with wheel Ixion, come, and come the sisters of the ceaseless toil, and all into this breast transfer their pains, and, if such tribute to despair be due, chant in their deepest tones a doleful dirge. Over a corse unworthy of a shroud, let the three-headed guardian of the gate, and all the monstrous progeny of hell, the doleful concert join, a lover dead. Lay of despair, grieve not when thou art gone. Forth from this sorrowing heart my misery brings fortune to the cause that gave thee birth. Then banish sadness, even in the tomb. Put it back on the pile with things that need burned. It's fine. It's fine, Vivaldo. You can do it. No one will judge you. It's okay. The Lay of Chrysostom met with the approbation of the listeners, though the reader said it did not seem to him to agree with what he had heard of Marcella's reserve and propriety, for Chrysostom complained in it of jealousy, suspicion, and absence, all to the prejudice of the good name and fame of Marcella, to which Ambrosio replied as one who knew well his friend's most secret thoughts. Signor, to remove that doubt, I should tell you that when the unhappy man wrote this lay, he was away from Marcella, from whom he had voluntarily separated himself, to try if absence would act with him as is wont. And as everything distresses and every fear haunts the banished lover, so imaginary jealousies and suspicions dreaded as if they were true, tormented Chrysostom, and thus the truth of what report declares of the virtue of Marcella remains unshaken, and with her envy itself should not and cannot find any fault save that of being cruel, somewhat haughty, and very scornful. That is true, said Vivaldo, and as he was about to read another paper of those he had preserved from the fire, he was stopped by a marvelous vision, or such it seemed, that unexpectedly presented itself to their eyes. For, on the summit of the rock where they were digging the grave, there appeared the shepherdess Marcella, so beautiful that her beauty exceeded its reputation. Those who had never till then beheld her gazed upon her in wonder and silence, and those who were accustomed to see her were not less amazed than those who had never seen her before. But the instant Ambrosio saw her, he addressed her with manifest indignation. Art thou come, by chance, cruel basilisk of these mountains, to see if in thy presence blood will flow from the wounds of this wretched being thy cruelty has robbed of life? Or is it to exult over the cruel work of thy humours that thou art come, or like another pitiless Nero, to look down from that height upon the ruin of his Rome in embers, or in thy arrogance to trample on this ill-fated corpse, as the ungrateful daughter trampled on her father Tarquin's? Tell us quickly for what thou art come, or what it is thou wouldst have. For as I know the thoughts of Chrysostom never failed to obey thee in life, I will make all these who call themselves his friends obey thee, though he be dead. I come not, Ambrosio, for any of the purposes thou hast named, replied Marcella, but to defend myself, and to prove how unreasonable are all those who blame me for their sorrows and for Chrysostom's death. And therefore I ask all of you that are here to give me your attention, for it will not take much time or many words to bring the truth home to persons of sense. Heaven has made me, so you say, beautiful, and so much so that in spite of yourselves my beauty leads you to love me. And for the love you show me, you say, and even urge, that I am bound to love you. By that natural understanding which God has given me, I know that everything beautiful attracts love, but I cannot see how, by reason of being loved, that which is loved for its beauty is bound to love that which loves it. Besides, it may happen that the lover of that which is beautiful may be ugly, and ugliness being detestable, it is very absurd to say, I love thee because thou art beautiful, thou must love me though I be ugly. But, supposing the beauty equal on both sides, it does not follow that the inclinations must therefore alike. For it is not every beauty that excites love. Some, but pleasing the eye without winning the affections, and if every sort of beauty excited love and won the heart, the will would wander vaguely to and fro, unable to make choice of any. For, as there is an infinity of beautiful objects, there must be an infinity of inclinations. And true love, I have heard it said, as indivisible, and must be voluntary, and not compelled. If this be so, as I believe it to be, why do you desire me to bend my will by force? For no other reason but that you say you love me. Nay, tell me, has heaven made me ugly? As it has made me beautiful, could I with justice complain of you not loving me? Moreover, you must remember that the beauty I possess was no choice of mine, for, be it what it may, heaven of its bounty gave it to me without my asking or choosing it. And, as the viper, though it kills with it, does not deserve to be blamed for the poison it carries, as it is a gift of nature, neither do I deserve reproach for being beautiful, for beauty in a modest woman is like fire at a distance, or a sharp sword. The one does not burn, the other does not cut. Those who do not come too near. Honor and virtue are the ornaments of the mind, without which the body, though it be so, has no right to pass for beautiful. But if modesty is one of the virtues that specially lend a grace and charm to mind and body, why should she who is loved for her beauty part with it to gratify one who for his pleasure alone strives with all his might and energy to rob her of it? I was born free, and that I might live in freedom I chose the solitude of the fields. In the trees of the mountains I find society. The clear waters of the brooks are my mirrors, and to the trees and waters I make known my thoughts and charms. I am a fire afar off, a sword laid aside. Those whom I have inspired with love by letting them see me, I have by words undeceived. And if their longings live on hope, and I have given none to Chrysostom or to any other, it cannot justly be said that the death of any is my doing, for it was rather his own obstinacy than my cruelty that killed him. And if it be made a charge against me that his wishes were honourable, and that therefore I was bound to yield to them, I answer that when on this very spot, where now his grave is made, he declared to me his purity of purpose, I told him that mine was to live in perpetual solitude, and that the earth alone should enjoy the fruits of my retirement and the spoils of my beauty. And if, after this open avowal, he chose to persist against hope and steer against the wind, what wonder is it that he should sink in the depths of his infatuations? If I had encouraged him, I should be false. If I had gratified him, I should have acted against my own better resolution and purpose. He was persistent, in spite of warning. He despaired, without being hated. Bethink you now, if it be reasonable, that his suffering should be laid to my charge. Let him who has been deceived complain. Let him give way to despair whose encouraged hopes have proved vain. Let him flatter himself, whom I shall entice. Let him boast, whom I shall receive. But let not him call me cruel or homicide, to whom I make no promise, upon whom I practice no deception. Whom I neither entice nor receive. It has not been so far that the will of heaven that I should love by fate, and to expect me to love by choice is idle. Let this general declaration serve for each of my suitors on his own account, and let it be understood from this time forth that if anyone dies for me, it is not of jealousy or misery he dies, for she who loves no one can give no cause for jealousy to any, and candour is not to be confounded with scorn. Let him who calls me wild beast and basilisk leave me alone as something noxious and evil. Let him who calls me ungrateful withhold his service. Who calls me wayward seek not my acquaintance. Who calls me cruel pursue me not. For this wild beast, this basilisk, this ungrateful, cruel, wayward being has no kind of desire to seek, serve, know, or follow them. If Chrysostom's impatience and violent passion killed him, why should my modest behavior and circumspection be blamed? If I preserve my purity in the society of the trees, why should he who would have me preserve it among men seek to rob me of it? I have, as you know, wealth of my own, and I covet not that of others. My taste is for freedom, and I have no relish for restraint or constraint. I neither love nor hate anyone. I do not deceive this one, or court that, or trifle with one, or play with another. The modest converse of the shepherd, girls of these hamlets, and the care of my goats are my recreations. My desires are bounded by these mountains, and if they ever wander hence, it is to contemplate the beauty of the heavens, steps by which the soul travels to its primordial abode. Whew, okay. Let's take a short breath here, because Marcella, go off queen, very valid, seen and witnessed, but that was a mouthful. All right. With these words, and not waiting to hear a reply, she turned and passed into the thickest part of a wood that was hard by, leaving all who were there lost in admiration, as much of her good sense as of her beauty. Some, those wounded by the irresistible shafts launched by her bright eyes, made as though they would follow her, heedless of the frank declaration they had heard, seeing which, and deeming this a fitting occasion for the exercise of his chivalry in aid of distressed damsels, Don Quixote, laying his hand on the hilt of his sword, exclaimed in a loud and distinct voice, "Let no one, whatever his rank or condition, dare to follow the beautiful Marcella, under pain of incurring my fierce indignation. She has shown by clear and satisfactory arguments that little or no fault is to be found with her for the death of Chrysostom, and also how far she is from yielding to the wishes of any of her lovers, for which reason, instead of being followed and persecuted, she should in justice be honored and esteemed by all the good people of the world, for she shows that she is the only woman in it that holds to such a virtuous resolution. Alright, say what you will about Don Quixote. Madman, crazy, chuny, lost in delusions. He's kind of on the right side of things more often than not. His execution's not really there, but he's on the right side of these issues. Whether it was because of the threats of Don Quixote, or because Ambrosio told them to fulfill their duty to their good friend, none of the shepherds moved or stirred from the spot until, having finished the grave and burned Chrysostom's papers, they laid his body in it, not without many tears from those who stood by. They closed the grave with a heavy stone until a slab was ready, which Ambrosio said he meant to have prepared, with an epitaph, which was to be to this effect: "Beneath the stone before your eyes, the body of a lover lies. In life he was a shepherd swain, in death a victim to disdain. Ungrateful, cruel, coy, and fair was she that drove him to despair. And love hath made her his ally, for spreading wide his tyranny." Alright, the epitaph is better than the man's poetry, so there's that. Then they strewed upon the grave a profusion of flowers and branches, and all expressing their condolences with his friend Ambrosio, took their leave. Vivaldo and his companion did the same, and Don Quixote bade farewell to his hosts, and to the travelers who pressed him to come with them to Seville, as being such a convenient place for finding adventures, for they presented themselves in every street and round every corner oftener than anywhere else. Don Quixote thanked them for their advice, and for the disposition they showed to do him a favor, and said that for the present he would not, and must not, go to Seville, until he had cleared all these mountains of highwaymen and robbers, of whom report said they were full. Seeing his good intention, the travelers were unwilling to press him further, and once more bidding him farewell, they left him and pursued their journey, in the course of which they did not fail to discuss the story of Marcella and Chrysostom, as well as the madness of Don Quixote. He, on his part, resolved to go in quest of the shepherdess Marcella, and make offer to her of all the service he could render her. But things did not fall out with him as he expected, according to what is related in the course of this veracious history, of which the second part ends here. And that is, presumably, Chrysostom being led off into the world beyond. Alright, that brings us to the end of chapter 14. Let's go ahead and take a few short minutes now. Stand up, stretch our legs, rub some warmth into our hands, because Lord knows it's a little chilly in here, and top up our drinks. And we'll be back in just a few minutes for our continued reading of Don Quixote. All right, settling back in. Oh, welcome, and thanks for holding the line, Castellare. I probably butchered that, but that is a relatively common thing around here. I am terrible with names. All right. Let's go ahead and continue our reading. We have a lot ahead of us. As was previously mentioned as we were going through, there is a lot of book to Don Quixote. So we've got a lot ahead of us, which, so far, is a treat. So, continuing on now with Chapter 15, in which is related the unfortunate adventure that Don Quixote fell in with when he fell out with certain heartless Yangisans. Yangisans? Yeah, we'll figure it out. The sage Cid Hamete Benengeli relates that as soon as Don Quixote took leave of his hosts, and all who had been present at the burial of Chrysostom, he and his squire passed into the same wood which they had seen the shepherdess Marcella enter, and, after having wandered for more than 2 hours in all directions in search of her without finding her, they came to a halt in a glade covered with tender grass, beside which ran a pleasant, cool stream that invited and compelled them to pass there the hours of the noontide heat, which by this time was beginning to come on oppressively. Don Quixote and Sancho dismounted, and turning Rocinante and the ass loose to feed on the grass that was there in abundance, they ransacked Alforos, and, without any ceremony, very peacefully and sociably, master and man made their repast on what they found in them. Sancho had not thought it worthwhile to hobble Rocinante, feeling sure, from what he knew of his steadiness and freedom from incontinence, that all the mares in the Cordova pastures would not lead him into an impropriety. Chance, however, and the devil, who is not always asleep, so ordained it that feeding in this valley there was a drove of Galician ponies belonging to a certain Yangisan carriers, whose way it was to take their midday rest with their teams in places and spots where grass and water abound, and that where Don Quixote chanced to be suited the Yangisan's purpose very well. It so happened, then, that Rocinante took a fancy to disport himself with their ladyships the ponies, and, abandoning his usual gait and demeanour as he scented them, he, without asking leave of his master, got up a briskish little trot, and hastened to make known his wishes to them. They, however, it seemed, preferred their pasture to him, and received him with their heels and teeth to such effect that they soon broke his girths and left him naked without a saddle to cover him. But what must have been worse to him was that the carriers, seeing the violence he was offering to their mares, came running up armed with stakes, and so belaboured him that they brought him sorely battered to the ground. By this time, Don Quixote and Sancho, who had witnessed the drubbing of Rocinante, came up panting, and said Don Quixote to Sancho, "So far as I can see, friend Sancho, these are not knights, but base folk of low birth. I mention it because thou canst lawfully aid me in taking due vengeance for the insult offered to Rocinante before our eyes." "What the devil vengeance can we take," answered Sancho, "if they are more than 20, and we no more than 2, or indeed, perhaps not more than 1.5. "I count for 100, replied Don Quixote, and without more words he drew his sword and attacked the Yangisans, and excited and impelled by the example of his master, Sancho did the same, and, to begin with, Don Quixote delivered a slash at one of them that laid open the leather jerkin he wore, together with a great portion of his shoulder. The Yangisans, seeing themselves assaulted by only 2 men, while they were so many, betook themselves to their stakes, and, driving the 2 into the middle, they began to lay on with great zeal and energy. In fact, At the second blow, they brought Sancho to the ground, and Don Quixote fared the same way, all his skill and high mettle availing him nothing. And fate willed it that he should fall at the feet of Rocinante, who had not yet risen, whereby it may be seen how furiously stake goose can pound in angry, boorish hands. Then, seeing the mischief they had done, the Angetians, with all the haste they could, loaded their team and pursued their journey, leaving the two adventurers in a sorry sight and in sorrier mood. Sancho was the first to come to, and finding himself close to his master, he called to him in a weak and doleful voice, "Señor Don Quixote, Señor Don Quixote." "What wouldst thou, brother Sancho?" answered Don Quixote in the same feeble, suffering tone as Sancho. I would like, if it were possible," answered Sancho Panza, "your worship to give me a couple of sups of that potion of the fiery blast, if it be that you have any to hand there. Perhaps it will serve for broken bones as well as for wounds." "If I only had it here, wretch that I am, what more should we want?" said Don Quixote. "But I swear to thee, Sancho Panza, on the faith of a knight-errant, ere 2 days are over, unless fortune orders otherwise, I mean to have it in my possession, or my hand will have lost its cunning." "But in how many does your worship think we shall have the use of our feet?" answered Sancho Panza. "For myself, I must say I cannot guess how many," said the battered knight Don Quixote, "but I take all the blame upon myself, for I had no business to put hand to sword against men who were not dubbed knights like myself. And so I believe that in punishment for having transgressed the laws of chivalry, the god of battles has permitted this chastisement to be administered to me. For which reason, brother Sancho, it is well thou shouldst receive a hint on the matter which I am now about to mention to thee, for it is of much importance to the welfare of both of us. It is that when thou shalt see rabble of this sort offering us insult, thou ought not to wait till I draw sword against them, for I shall not do so at all. But do thou draw sword and chastise them to thy heart's content, and if any knights come to their aid and defence, I will take care to defend thee and assail them with all my might. And thou hast already seen by 1,000 signs and proofs what the might of this strong arm of mine is equal to." So uplifted had the poor gentleman become through the victory over the stout Biscayan. Yeah, so he's certainly saying, you know what, I'm going to sit back and let you take care of things, Sancho. Don't worry. You got this. I believe in you. And if another knight shows up, never mind that we've never seen another knight, I'll handle it. So, next time it'd be 1 verse 20 instead of 2 verse 20, because it's all the Sancho show. But Sancho did not so fully approve of his master's admonition as to let it pass without saying in reply, "Signor, I am a man of peace, meek and quiet, and I can put up with any affront because I have a wife and children to support and bring up. So let it be likewise a hint to your worship, as it cannot be a mandate, that on no account will I draw sword either against clown or against knight, and that here, before God, I forgive the insults that have been offered me, whether they have been, or are, or shall be offered me by high or low, rich or poor, noble or commoner, not accepting any rank or condition whatsoever." To all which his master said in reply, "I wish I had breath enough to speak somewhat easily, and that the pain I feel on this side would abate so as to let me explain to thee, Panza. The mistake thou makest Come now, sinner, suppose the wind of fortune, hitherto so adverse, should turn in our favour, filling the sails of our desires, so that safely, and without impediment, we put into port in some one of those islands I have promised thee. How would it be with thee, if on winning it I made thee lord of it? Why, thou wilt make it well nigh impossible, through not being a knight, nor having any desire to be one, nor possessing the courage nor the will to avenge insults, or defend thy lordship. For thou must know that in newly conquered kingdoms and provinces the minds of the inhabitants are never so quiet, nor so well disposed to the new lord, that there is no fear of their making some move to change matters once more, and try, as they say, what chance may do for them. So it is essential that the new possessor should have good sense to enable him to govern, and valour to attack and defend himself, whatever may befall him.
In what has now befallen us, answered Sancho, I'd have been well pleased to have that good sense and the valour your worship speaks of. But I swear, on the faith of a poor man, I am more fit for plasters than for arguments. See if your worship can get up, and let us help Rocinante, though he does not deserve it, for he was the main cause of all his thrashing. I never thought it of Rocinante, for I took him to be a virtuous person, and as quiet as myself. After all, they say right that it takes a long time to come to know people, and that there is nothing sure in this life. Who would have said that? After such mighty slashes as your worship gave that unlucky knight-errant, there was coming, travelling post, and at the very heels of them, such a great storm of sticks as has fallen upon our shoulders. And yet thine, Sancho, replied Don Quixote, ought to be used to such squalls. But mine, reared in soft cloth and fine linen, it is plain that they must feel more keenly the pain of this mishap. And if it were not that, I imagine— why do I say imagine? Know of a certainty that all these annoyances are very necessary accompaniments of the calling of arms. I would lay me down here to die of pure vexation. To this the squire replied, Signor, as these mishaps are what one reaps of chivalry, tell me if they happen very often, or if they have their own fixed times for coming to pass, because it seems to me that after 2 harvests we shall be no good for the 3rd, unless God in his infinite mercy helps us.
Know, friend Sancho, answered Don Quixote, that the life of knights-errant is subject to 1,000 dangers and reverses, and neither more nor less is it within immediate possibility for knights-errant to become kings and emperors, as experience has shown in the case of many different knights, with those with whose histories I am thoroughly acquainted. And I could tell thee now, if the pain would let me, of some who simply by might of arm have risen to the high stations I have mentioned, and those same, both before and after, experienced diverse misfortunes and miseries. For the valiant Amadis of Gaul found himself in the power of his mortal enemy, Archelaus the magician, who, it is positively asserted, holding him captive, gave him more than 200 lashes with the reins of his horse, while tied to one of the pillars of a court. And moreover, there is a certain recondite author of no small authority, who says that the knight of Phoebus, being caught in a certain pitfall, which opened under his feet in a certain castle, on falling found himself bound hand and foot in a deep pit underground, where they administered to him one of those things they call clysters, of sand and snow water, that well nigh finished him. And if he had not been succoured in that sore extremity by a sage, a great friend of his, it would have gone very hard with the poor knight. But I may well suffer in company with such worthy folk, for greater were the indignities which they had to suffer than those which we suffer. For I would have thee know, Sancho, that wounds caused by any instruments which happen by chance to be in hand inflict no indignity, and this is laid down in the law of the duel in express words. If, for instance, the cobbler strikes another with the last which he has in his hand, though it be in fact a piece of wood, it cannot be said for that reason that he whom he struck with it has been cudgelled. I say this, lest thou shouldst imagine that because we have been drubbed in this affray, we have therefore suffered any indignity. For the arms those men carried, which they pounded at us, were nothing more than their stakes, and not one of them, so far as I remember, carried rapier, sword, or dagger. We've got another bit of a buffering situation here. Let's hang tight for just a minute as we hopefully let this one pass. ISP's doing us dirty tonight. Okay, I think we may be past it now. I'm not seeing any additional drops. Let's just make sure it stays stable for a minute, and then we'll jump back in. Yep, alright, I think we're good. And there... Okay. Oh, and we're dropping more. Thank you very much. Oh, maybe? Alright, let's try and power through a little bit, because we're just a couple seconds behind on my YouTube stream. Twitch seems to have a little bit more of a delay than YouTube does. Okay. Alright, yep, let's carry on.
They gave me no time to see that much,
answered Sancho.
For hardly had I laid hand on my Tizona, when they signed the cross on my shoulders with their sticks in such style that they took the sight out of my eyes and the strength out of my feet, stretching me where I now lie. And where, thinking of whether all those stake strokes were an indignity or not, gives me no uneasiness, which the pain of the blows does, for they will remain as deeply impressed on my memory as on my shoulders.
For all that, let me tell thee, brother Panza, said Don Quixote, that there is no recollection which time does not put an end to, and no pain which death does not remove.
And what greater misfortune can there be, replied Panza, than the one that waits for time to put an end to it, and death to remove it? If our mishap were one of those that are cured with a couple of plasters, it would not be so bad. But I am beginning to think that all the plasters in a hospital almost won't be enough to put us right.
No more of that. Pluck strength out of weakness, Sancho, as I mean to do, returned Don Quixote, and let us see how Rocinante is. For it seems to me that not the least share of this mishap has fallen to the lot of the poor beast.
There's nothing wonderful in that, replied Sancho, since he is a knight-errant too. What I wonder at is that my beast should have come off scot-free, where we come out scotched.
Fortune always leaves a door open in adversity, in order to bring relief to it, said Don Quixote. And I say there are additional dropped frames. We don't have that much time left. Come on, Internet, be nice. Okay. I say so, because this little beast may now supply the want of Rocinante, carrying me hence to some castle where I may be cured of my wounds. And, moreover, I shall not hold it any dishonour to be so mounted, for I remember having read how the good old Silenus, the tutor and instructor of the gay god of laughter, when he entered the city of the 100 Gates, went very contentedly, mounted on a handsome ass.
Why, it may be true that he went mounted as your worship says, answered Sancho, but there is a great difference between going mounted and going slung like a sack of manure.
To which Don Quixote replied, "Wounds received in battle confer honor, instead of taking it away, and so, friend Panza, say no more. But, as I told thee before, get up as well as thou canst, and put me on top of thy beast in whatever fashion pleases thee best. And let us go hence, ere night come on and surprise us in these wilds."
"And yet I have heard your worship say," observed Panza, "that it is very meet for knights errant to sleep in wastes and deserts, and that they esteem it very good fortune."
"That is," said Don Quixote, "when they cannot help it, or when they are in love. And so true is this, that there have been knights who have remained 2 years on rocks, in sunshine and shade, and all the inclemencies of heaven, without their ladies knowing anything of it. And one of these was Amadis, when, under the name of Beltenebros, he took up his abode on the Penne Pobre, for, I know not if it was 8 years or 8 months, for I am not very sure of the reckoning. At any rate, he stayed there doing penance, for I know not what pique the Princess Oriana had against him. But no more of this now, Sancho, and make haste, before a mishap like Rocinante befalls the ass."
"The very devil would be in it in that case,"
said Sancho, and letting off 30 oaths, and 60 sighs, and 120 maledictions and execrations on whomsoever it was that had brought him there, he raised himself, stopping halfway bent like a Turkish bow, without power to bring himself upright. But with all his pains he saddled his ass, who too had gone astray somewhat, yielding to the excessive license of the day. He next raised up Rocinante, and as for him, had he possessed a tongue to complain with, most assuredly neither Sancho nor his master would have been behind him. To be brief, Sancho fixed Don Quixote on the ass, and secured Rocinante with a leading rein, and, taking the ass by the halter, he proceeded more or less in the direction in which it seemed to him the high road might be, and, as chance was conducting their affairs for them from good to better, he had not gone a short league when the road came in sight, and on it he perceived an inn, which, to his annoyance and to the delight of Don Quixote, must needs be a castle. Sancho insisted that it was an inn, and his master that it was not one, but a castle. And the dispute lasted so long that before the point was settled, they had time to reach it. And into it Sancho entered with all his team without any further controversy. And here we see the two of them most decidedly laid out after getting beaten by sticks by a bunch of cowpoke. It definitely seems like Sancho is waking to the realization that maybe following a madman across the countryside wasn't the best of ideas. Just maybe. It might be worth a little bit more trouble than it's worth. But we'll see. He's still having some fun, I guess. And he feasted by goat herds in the wilderness. Alright. We probably have time for 2 more chapters, I think, tonight at this rate. So let's continue with chapter 16 of what happened to the ingenious gentleman in the inn which he took to be a castle. The innkeeper, seeing Don Quixote slung across the ass, asked Sancho what was amiss with him. Sancho answered that it was nothing, only that he had fallen down from a rock and had his ribs a little bruised. The innkeeper had a wife whose disposition was not such as those of her calling commonly have, for she was by nature kind-hearted, and felt for the sufferings of her neighbors. So she at once set about tending Don Quixote, and made her young daughter, a very comely girl, help her in taking care of their guest. It's a very backhanded way to say that she's a nice lady. To say, oh yeah, no, all innkeepers' wives are shrill and nasty, except for this one. There was, besides in the inn, as servant, an Austrian lass with a broad face, flat poll, and a snub nose, blind of one eye and not very sound in the other. The elegance of her shape, to be sure, made up for all her defects. She did not measure 7 palms from head to foot, and her shoulders, which overweighted her somewhat, made her contemplate the ground more than she liked. This graceful lass, then, helped the young girl, and the two made up a very bad bed for Don Quixote in a garret, which showed evident signs of having formerly served for many years as a straw loft, in which there was also quartered a carrier, whose bed was placed a little beyond our Don Quixote's, and, though only made of the pack saddles and clothes of his mules, had much the advantage of it, as Don Quixote's consisted simply of 4 rough boards on 2 not very even trestles, a mattress that, for thinness, might have passed for a quilt, full of pellets which, were they not seen through the rents to be wool, would, to the touch, have seemed pebbles in hardness. 2 sheets made of buckler leather, and a coverlet, the threads of which anyone that chose might have counted without missing one in the reckoning. On this accursed bed, Don Quixote stretched himself, and the hostess and her daughter soon covered him with plasters from top to toe, while Maritornes, for that was the name of the Asturian, held the light for them. And while plastering him, the hostess, observing how full of wheals Don Quixote was in some places, remarked that this had more the look of blows than of a fall. It was not blows, Sancho said, but that the rock had many points and projections, and that each of them had left its mark.
Pray, Signora, he added, manage to save some time, as there will be no want of someone to use it. For my loins, too, are rather sore.
Then you must have fallen too, said the hostess.
I did not fall, said Sancho Panza, but from the shock I got at seeing my master fall, my body aches so that I feel as if I had had 1,000 thwacks.
That may well be, said the young girl. For it has many a time happened to me to dream that I was falling down from a tower and never coming to the ground, and when I awoke from the dream to find myself as weak and shaken as if I had really fallen.
There is the point, Signora, replied Sancho Panza, that I, without dreaming at all, but being more awake than I am now, find myself with scarcely less wheels than my master Don Quixote.
How is the gentleman called? Asked Maritornes the Asturian.
Don Quixote of La Mancha, answered Sancho Panza, and he is a knight adventurer, and one of the best and stoutest that have been seen in the world this long time past.
What is a knight adventurer? Said the lass.
Are you so new in the world as not to know? Answered Sancho Panza. Well then, you must know, sister, that a knight adventurer is a thing that in 2 words is seen, drubbed, and emperor. That is, today the most miserable and needy being in the world, and tomorrow will have 2 or 3 crowns of kingdoms to give his squire.
Then how is it, said the hostess, that, belonging to so good a master as this, you have not, to judge by appearances, even so much as a county?
It is too soon yet, answered Sancho, for we have only been a month going in quest of adventures, and so far we have met with nothing that can be called one. For it will happen that when one thing is looked for, another thing is found. However, if my master Don Quixote gets well of this wound, or fall, and I am left none the worse of it, I would not change my hopes for the best title in Spain.
To all this conversation, Don Quixote was listening very attentively, and sitting up in bed as well as he could. And taking the hostess by the hand, he said to her, "Believe me, fair lady, you may call yourself fortunate
in having in this castle of yours sheltered my person, which is such that if I do not myself praise it, it is because of what is commonly said, that self-praise debaseth. But my squire will inform you of who I am. I only tell you that I shall preserve, forever inscribed on my memory, the service you have rendered me in order to tender you my gratitude while life shall last me. And would to heaven love held me not so enthralled, and subject to its laws, and to the eyes of that fair ingrate whom I name between my teeth, but that those of this lovely damsel might be the masters of my liberty.
I'm not sure if Sancho is drinking the Kool-Aid, or if he noticed that Don Quixote was awake and was doing a little bit of brown-nosing. It could be a little bit of both. I think Sancho is a lot more clever than anyone gives him credit, so he may have noticed and caught on. The hostess, her daughter, and the worthy Maritornes listened in bewilderment to the words of the knight-errant, for they understood about as much of them as if he had been talking Greek, though they could perceive that they were all meant for expressions of goodwill and blandishments, and not being accustomed to this kind of language, they stared at him and wondered to themselves, for he seemed to them a man of a different sort from those they were used to, and thanking him in pothouse phrase for his civility, they left him, while the Asturian girl gave her attention to Sancho, who needed it no less than his master. The carrier had made an arrangement with her for recreation that night, and she had given him her word that when the guests were quiet and the family asleep, she would come in search of him and meet his wishes unreservedly. And it is said of this good lass that she never made promises of the kind without fulfilling them, even though she made them in a forest and without any witness present, for she plumed herself greatly on being a lady, and held it no disgrace to be in such an employment as servant in an inn, because she had misfortunes and ill luck had brought her to that position. The hard, narrow, wretched, rickety bed of Don Quixote stood first in the middle of this starlit stable, and close beside it Sancho made his, which merely consisted of a rush mat and a blanket that looked as if it was of threadbare canvas rather than of wool. Next to these two beds was that of the carrier, made up, as has been said, of the pack saddles, and all the trappings of the two best mules he had, though there were 12 of them, sleek, plump, and in prime condition, for he was one of the rich carriers of Arevalo, according to the author of this history, who particularly mentions this carrier, because he knew him very well, and they even say was in some degree a relation of his, besides which Cid Hamete Benengeli was a historian, of great research and accuracy in all things, as is very evident, since he would not pass over in silence those that have been already mentioned, however trifling and insignificant they might be, an example that might be followed by those grave historians who relate transactions so curtly and briefly that we hardly get a taste of them. All the substance of the work being left in the inkstand from carelessness, perverseness, or ignorance. 1,000 blessings on the author of Tablante de Ricomonte, and that of the other book in which the deeds of the Conde Tomilias are recounted. With what minuteness they describe everything. To proceed, then, after having paid a visit to his team and given them their second feed, the carrier stretched himself on his pack saddles and lay waiting for his conscientious Maritornes. Sancho was by this time plastered and lain down. Plastered in the medical sense, not the entertaining sense. Although with Sancho it could be either. And though he strove to sleep, the pain of his ribs would not let him, while Don Quixote, with the pain of his, had his eyes as wide open as a hare's. Excuse me? Don Quixote, what are you doing to Pancho? The inn was all in silence, and in the whole of it there was no light except that given by a lantern that hung burning in the middle of the gateway. This strange stillness, and the thoughts, always present to our knight's mind, of the incidents described at every turn in the books that were the cause of his misfortune, conjured up to his imagination as extraordinary a delusion as can well be conceived. Hang on. Get somebody... Yeah, let's not have that one. Yep, gotta... Where is it? Here it is. Yeah, bonk. Alright, tidied that up. Alright, carrying on then. Where were we? This strange illness, and the thoughts always present to our knight's mind of the incidents described at every turn in the books that were the cause of his misfortune, conjured up to his imagination as extraordinary a delusion as can well be conceived, which was, that he fancied himself to have reached a famous castle, for, as has been said, all the inns he lodged in were castles to his eyes, and that the daughter of the innkeeper was daughter of the lord of the castle, and that she, won by his high-bred bearing, had fallen in love with him, and had promised to come to his bed for a while that night, without the knowledge of her parents, and holding all this fantasy that he had constructed as solid fact, he began to feel uneasy, and to consider the perilous risk which his virtue was about to encounter. And he resolved in his heart to commit no treason to his lady Dulcinea del Toboso, even though the Queen Guinevere herself and the Dame Quintanona should present themselves before him. While he was taken up with these vagaries, then the time and the hour, an unlucky one for him, arrived for the Asturian to come, who, in her smock, with bare feet, and her hair gathered in a fustian coif, with noiseless and cautious steps, entered the chamber where the three were quartered, in quest of the carrier. But scarcely had she gained the door when Don Quixote perceived her, and, sitting up in his bed, in spite of his plasters and the pain of his ribs, he stretched out his arms to receive his beauteous damsel. The Asturian, who went all doubled up and in silence with her hands before her, feeling for her lover, encountered the arms of Don Quixote, who grasped her tightly by the wrist, and drawing her towards him, while she dared not utter a word, made her sit down on the bed. He then felt her smock, and although it was of sackcloth, it appeared to him to be of the finest and softest silk. On her wrists she wore some glass beads, but to him they had the sheen of precious orient pearls. Her hair, which in some measure resembled a horse's mane, he rated as threads of the brightest gold of Araby, whose refulgence dimmed the sun himself. Her breath, which no doubt smelt of yesterday's stale salad, seemed to him to diffuse a sweet aromatic fragrance from her mouth. And, in short, he drew her portrait in his imagination with the same features and in the same style as that which he had seen in his books of the other princesses who, smitten by love, came with all the adornments that are here set down, to see the sorely wounded knight. And so great was the poor gentleman's blindness that neither touch nor smell nor anything else about the good lass that would have made any but a carrier vomit were enough to undeceive him. On the contrary, He was persuaded. He had the goddess of beauty in his arms, and, holding her firmly in his grasp, he went on to say in low, tender voice, "Would that I found myself, lovely and exalted lady, in a position to repay such favour as that which you, by the sight of your great beauty, have granted me. But fortune, which is never weary of persecuting the good, has chosen to place me upon this bed, where I lie so bruised and broken, that though my inclination would gladly comply with yours, it is impossible. Besides, to this impossibility another, yet greater, is to be added, which is the faith that I have pledged to the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, sole lady of my most secret thoughts. And were it not that this stood in the way, I should not be so insensible a knight as to miss the happy opportunity which your great goodness had offered me." Maritornes was fretting and sweating at finding herself held so fast by Don Quixote, and, not understanding or heeding the words he addressed to her, she strove without speaking to free herself. The worthy carrier, whose unholy thoughts kept him awake, was aware of his doxy the moment she entered the door, and was listening attentively to all Don Quixote said, and, jealous that the Asturian should have broken her word with him for another, drew nearer to Don Quixote's bed, and stood still to see what would come of this talk which he could not understand. But when he perceived the wench struggling to get free, and Don Quixote striving to hold her, not relishing the joke, he raised his arm and delivered such a terrible cuff on the lank jaws of the amorous knight that he bathed all his mouth in blood. And not content with this, he mounted on his ribs, and with his feet tramped all over them at a pace rather smarter than a trot. The bed, which was somewhat crazy and not very firm on its feet, unable to support the additional weight of the carrier, came to the ground, and, at the mighty crash of this, the innkeeper awoke, and at once concluded that it must be some brawl of Maritornes, because, after calling loudly to her, he got no answer. With this suspicion he got up, and, lighting a lamp, hastened to the quarter where he had heard the disturbance. The wench, seeing that her master was coming, and knowing that his temper was terrible, frightened and panic-stricken, made for the bed of Sancho Panza, who still slept, and, crouching upon it, made a ball of herself. The innkeeper came in, exclaiming, "Where art thou, strumpet? Of course, this is some of thy work." At this Sancho awoke, and, feeling this mass almost on top of him, fancied he had the nightmare, and began to distribute fisticuffs all around, of which a certain share fell upon Maritornes, who, irritated by the pain and flinging modesty aside, paid back so many in return to Sancho that she woke him up in spite of himself. He then, finding himself so handled, by whom he knew not, raising himself up as well as he could, grappled with Maritornes, and he and she between them began the bitterest and drollest scrimmage in the world. The carrier, however, perceiving by the light of the innkeeper candle how it fared with his lady love, quitting Don Quixote, ran to bring her the help she needed, and the innkeeper did the same, but with a different intention. For his was to chastise the lass, as he believed that, beyond a doubt, she alone was the cause of all the harmony. And so, as the saying is, cat to rat, rat to rope, rope to stick, the carrier pounded Sancho, Sancho the lass, she him, and the innkeeper her, and all worked away so briskly that they did not give themselves a moment's rest. And the best of it was that the innkeeper's lamp went out, and as they were left in the dark, they all laid on one another the other in a mass so unmercifully that there was not a sound spot left where a hand could light. it so happened there was lodging that night in the inn a quadrillero of what they call the Old Holy Brotherhood of Toledo, who, also hearing the extraordinary noise of the conflict, seized his staff and the tin case with his warrants, and made his way into the dark, into the room, crying, "Hold! In the name of the jurisdiction! Hold! In the name of the Holy Brotherhood!" The first that he came upon was the pummeled Don Quixote, who lay stretched senseless on his back upon his broken-down bed, and his hand falling on the beard as he felt about. He continued to cry, "Help for the jurisdiction!" But perceiving that he, whom he had laid hold of, did not move or stir, he concluded that he was dead, and that those in the room were his murderers. And with this suspicion, he raised his finger still higher, calling out, "Shut the inn gate! See that no one goes out! They have killed a man here!" His cry startled them all, and each dropped the contest at this point, at the point at which the voice reached him. The innkeeper retreated to his room, the carrier to his pack-saddles, the last to her crib. The unlucky Don Quixote and Sancho alone were unable to move from where they were. The quadrillero on this let go Don Quixote's beard, and went out to look for a light to search for and apprehend the culprits. But not finding one, as the innkeeper had purposely extinguished the lantern on retreating to his room, he was compelled to have recourse to the hearth, where, after much time and trouble, he lit another lamp. Presuming this is what's coming up in the next chapter, because we haven't seen anything quite the like here. Alright, the next one is a little long, but we can probably go over. It's not too bad. Yeah, let's get one more chapter in. That'll get us to about the 15% mark, which is about where I want us to be tonight. So, let's continue with chapter 17, in which are contained the innumerable troubles which the brave Don Quixote and his good squire Sancho Panza endured at the inn, which, to his misfortune, he took to be a castle. Yeah, this is rather more of the misadventures that we've seen. By this time, Don Quixote had recovered from his swoon, and in the same tone of voice in which he had called to his squire the day before when he lay stretched in the vale of the stakes, he began calling to him now. "Sancho, my friend, art thou asleep? Sleepest thou, friend Sancho?"
"How can I sleep? Curses on it,"
returned Sancho discontentedly and bitterly,
"when it is plain that all the devils have been at me this night."
"Thou mayest well believe that," answered Don Quixote, "because either I know little, or this castle is enchanted, for thou must know. But this that I am now about to tell thee, thou must swear to keep secret until after my death."
"I swear it,"
answered Sancho. "I say so," continued Don Quixote, "because I hate taking away anyone's good name."
"I say," replied Sancho, "that I swear to hold my tongue about it till the end of your worship's days, and God grant I may be able to let it out tomorrow."
Okay, Sancho. "Do I do thee such injuries, Sancho," said Don Quixote, "that thou wouldst see me dead so soon?" Okay, so Don Quixote catches that.
"It is not for that," replied Sancho, "but because I hate keeping things long, and I don't want them to grow rotten with me from overkeeping."
"At any rate," said Don Quixote, "I have more confidence in thy affection and good nature, and so I would have thee know that this night there befell me one of the strangest adventures that I could describe, and to relate it to thee briefly, thou must know that a little while ago the daughter of the lord of this castle came to me, and that she is the most elegant and beautiful damsel that could be found in the wide world. What I could tell thee of the charms of her person, of her lively wit, of other secret matters, which, to preserve the fealty I owe to my lady Dulcinea del Toboso, I shall pass over, unnoticed, and in silence. I will only tell thee that either fate, being envious of so great a boon placed in my hands by good fortune, or perhaps, and this is more probable, this castle being, as I have already said, enchanted, at the time when I was engaged in the sweetest and most amorous discourse with her, there came, without my seeing or knowing whence it came, a hand attached to some arm of some huge giant, that planted such a cuff on my jaws that I have them all bathed in blood, and then pummeled me in such a way that I am in a worse plight than yesterday, when the carriers, on account of Rocinant's misbehaviour, inflicted on us the injury thou knowest of. Whence conjecture that there must be some enchanted Moor guarding the treasure of this damsel's beauty, and that it is not for me.
Not for me either, said Sancho, for more than 400 Moors have so thrashed me that the drubbing of the stakes was cakes and fancy bread to it. But tell me, Signor, what do you call this excellent and rare adventure that has left us as we are left now? Though your worship was not so badly off, having in your arms that incomparable beauty you spoke of. But what did I have? Except the heaviest wax I think I had in all my life. Unlucky me, and the mother that bore me, for I am not a knight-errant, and never expect to be one, and of all of mishaps the greater part falls to my share.
Then thou hast been thrashed too, said Don Quixote.
Didn't I say so? Worse luck to my line,
said Sancho. Do not be distressed, friend, said Don Quixote, for I will now make the precious balsam, with which we shall cure ourselves in the twinkling of an eye. By this time, the quadrillero had succeeded in lighting the lamp, and came in to see the man that he thought had been killed. And as Sancho caught sight of him at the door, seeing him coming in his shirt with a cloth on his head and a lamp in his hand and a very forbidding countenance, he said to his master,
Signor, can it be that this is the enchanted Moor coming back to give us more castigation, if there be anything still left in the ink bottle?
It cannot be the Moor, answered Don Quixote, for those under enchantment do not let themselves be seen by anyone.
If they don't let themselves be seen, they can let themselves be felt, said Sancho. If not, let my shoulders speak to the point.
Mine could speak too, said Don Quixote, but that is not a sufficient reason for believing that what we see is the enchanted Moor. The officer came up, and finding them engaged in such a peaceful conversation, stood amazed, though Don Quixote, to be sure, still lay on his back, unable to move from pure pummeling and plasters. The officer turned to him and said, Well, how goes it, good man? I would speak more politely if I were you, replied Don Quixote. Is it the way of this country to address knights-errant in that style, you booby? The quadrillero, finding himself so disrespectfully treated by such a sorry-looking individual, lost his temper, and raising the lamp full of oil, smote Don Quixote such a blow with it on the head that he gave him a badly broken pate. Then, all being in darkness, he went out, and Sancho Panza said,
That is certainly the enchanted Moor, Signor, and he keeps the treasure for others, and for us, only the cuffs and lamp wax.
That is the truth, answered Don Quixote, and there is no use in troubling oneself about these matters of enchantment or being angry or vexed at them, for as they are invisible and visionary, we shall find no one on whom to avenge ourselves. Do what we may. Rise, Sancho, if thou canst, and call the alcayde of this fortress, and get him to give me a little oil, wine, salt, and rosemary, to make the salutiferous balsam. For indeed, I believe I have great need of it now, because I am losing much blood from the wound that phantom gave me." Sancho got up with pain enough in his bones and went after the innkeeper in the dark. And meeting the officer, who was looking to see what had become of his enemy, he came to him.
Signor, whoever you are, do us the favor and kindness to give us a little rosemary, oil, salt, and wine, for it is wanted to cure one of the best knights-errant on earth, who lies on yonder bed, wounded by the hands of the enchanted Moor that is in this inn."
When the officer heard him talk in this way, he took him for a man out of his senses, and as day was now beginning to break, he opened the inn gate, and calling the host, he told him what this good man wanted. The host furnished him with what he required, and Sancho brought it to Don Quixote, who with his hand to his head was bewailing the pain of the blow of the lamp, which had done him no more harm than raising a couple of rather large lumps, and what he fancied blood was only the sweat that flowed from him in his sufferings during the late storm. To be brief, he took the materials, of which he made a compound, mixing them all and boiling them a good while, until it seemed to him they had come to perfection. He then asked for some vial to pour it into, and as there was not one in the inn, he decided on putting it into a tin oil bottle, or flask, of which the host made him a free gift. And over the flask he repeated more than 80 paternosters, and as many more Ave Marias, salves, and credos, accompanying each word with a cross by way of benediction. At all which there were present Sancho, the innkeeper, and the quadrillero, for the carrier was now peacefully engaged in attending to the comfort of his mules. This being accomplished, he felt anxious to make trial himself, on the spot, of the virtue of this precious balsam, as he considered it, and so he drank near a quart of what could not be put into the flask, and remained in the pigskin in which it had been boiled. But scarcely had he done drinking when he began to vomit in such a way that nothing was left in his stomach, and with the pangs and spasms of vomiting he broke into a profuse sweat, on account of which he bade them cover him up and leave him alone. They did so, and he lay sleeping more than 3 hours, at the end of which he awoke and felt very great bodily relief, and so much ease from his bruises that he thought himself quite cured, and verily believed he had hit upon the balsam of Fierabas, and that with this remedy he might thenceforward, without any fear, face any kind of destruction, battle, or combat, however perilous it might be. Of course, yeah, that sounds about right. Sancho Panza, who also regarded the amendment of his master as miraculous, begged him to give him what was left in the pigskin, which was no small quantity. Don Quixote consented, and he, taking it with both hands in good faith and with a better will, gulped down and drained off a very little less than his master. But the fact is that the stomach of poor Sancho was, of necessity, not so delicate as that of his master, and so, before vomiting, he was seized with such grippings and retchings, and such sweats and faintness, that verily and truly he believed his last hour had come. And finding himself so racked and tormented, he cursed the balsam and the thief that had given it to him. Don Quixote, seeing him in this state, said, "It is my belief, Sancho, that this mischief comes of thy not being dubbed a knight, for I am persuaded this liquor cannot be good for those who are not so."
"If your worship knew that," returned Sancho, "woe betide me and all my kindred. Why did you let me taste it?"
At this moment the draught took effect, and the poor squire began to discharge both ways, at such a rate that the rush mat on which he had thrown himself and the canvas blanket he had covering him were fit for nothing afterwards. He sweated and perspired with such paroxysms and convulsions that not only he himself but all present thought his end was come. This tempest and tribulation lasted about 2 hours, at the end of which he was left, not like his master, but so weak and exhausted that he could not stand. Don Quixote, however, who, as has been said, felt himself relieved and well, was eager to take his departure at once in quest of adventures. It seemed to him that all the time he loitered there was a fraud upon the world, and those in it who stood in need of his help and protection. All the more when he had the security and confidence his balsam afforded him. And so, urged by this impulse, he saddled Rocinante himself, and put the pack-saddle on his squire's beast, whom likewise he helped to dress and mount the ass. After which he mounted his horse, and turning to a corner of the inn, he laid a hold of a pike that stood there, to serve him by way of a lance. All that were in the inn, who were more than 20 persons, stood watching him. The innkeeper's daughter was likewise observing him, and he too never took his eyes off her, and from time to time fetched a sigh that seemed to pluck up from the depths of his bowels. But they all thought it must be from the pain he felt in his ribs. At any rate, they who had seen him plastered the night before thought so. As soon as they were both mounted, at the gate of the inn, he called them to the host, and said in a very grave and measured voice, "Many and great are the favors, Signor Alcade, that I have received in this castle of yours, and I remain under the deepest obligation to be grateful to you for them all the days of my life. If I can repay them in avenging you of any arrogant foe who may have wronged you, know that my calling is no other than to aid the weak, to avenge those who suffer wrong, and to chastise perfidy. Search your memory, and if you find anything of this kind, you need only tell me of it, and I promise you, by the order of knighthood which I received, to procure you satisfaction and reparation to the utmost of your desire." The innkeeper replied to him with equal calmness, "Sir Knight, I do not want your worship to avenge me of any wrong, because when any is done me, I can take what vengeance seems good to me. The only thing I want is that you pay me the score that you have run up in the inn last night, as well for the straw and barley for your 2 beasts, as for supper and beds." "Then this is an inn?" said Don Quixote. "And a very respectable one," said the innkeeper. "I have been under a mistake all this time," answered Don Quixote, "for in truth I thought it was a castle, and not a bad one, but since it appears that it is not a castle but an inn, all that can be done now is that you should excuse the payment, for I cannot contravene the rule of knights-errant, of whom I know as a fact, and up to the present I have read nothing to the contrary, that they never paid for lodging or anything else in the inn where they might be. For any hospitality that might be offered them is their due by law and by right in return for the insufferable toil they endure in seeking adventures by night and by day, in summer and in winter, and on foot and on horseback, in hunger and thirst, cold and heat, exposed to all the inclemencies of heaven and all the hardships of earth." "I have little to do with that," replied the innkeeper. "Pay me what you owe me, and let us have no more talk of chivalry, for all I care about is to get my money." "You are a stupid, scurvy innkeeper." "Calm down, Don," said Don Quixote, and putting spurs to Rocinante and bringing his pike to the slope, he rode out of the inn before anyone could stop him, and pushed on some distance without looking to see if his squire was following him. The innkeeper, when he saw him go without paying him, ran to get payment of Sancho, who said that as his master would not pay, neither would he, because, being as he was squire to a knight-errant, the same rule and reason held good for him, as for his master, with regard to not paying anything in inns and hostelries. At this, the innkeeper waxed very wroth, and threatened if he did not pay to compel him in a way that he would not like. To which Sancho made answer that, by the law of chivalry his master had received, he would not pay a rap, though it cost him his life, for the excellent and ancient usage of knights-errant was not going to be violated by him, nor should the squires of such as were yet to come into the world ever complain of him or reproach him with breaking so just a privilege. The ill luck of the unfortunate Sancho so ordered it that among the company in the inn there were 4 wool carters from Segovia, 3 needlemakers from the colt of Cordova, and 2 lodgers from the fair of Seville. Lively fellows, tender-hearted, fond of a joke, and playful, who, almost as if instigated and moved by a common impulse, made up to Sancho and dismounted him from his ass, while one of them went in for the blanket of the host's bed. But on flinging him into it, they looked up, and seeing that the ceiling was somewhat lower than what they required for their work, they decided upon going out into the yard, which he was bounded by the sky, and there, putting Sancho in the middle of the blanket, they began to raise him high, making sport with him as they would with a dog at Shrovetide. The cries of the poor blanketed wretch were so loud that they reached the ears of his master, who, halting to listen attentively, was persuaded that some new adventure was coming, until he clearly perceived that it was his squire who uttered them. Wheeling about, he came up to the inn with a laborious gallop, and, finding it shut, went round it to see if he could find some way of getting in. But as soon as he came to the wall of the yard, which was not very high, he discovered the game that was being played with his squire. He saw him rising and falling in the air with such grace and nimbleness that, had his rage allowed him, it is my belief he would have laughed. He tried to climb from his horse onto the top of the wall, but he was so bruised and battered that he could not even dismount. And so, from the back of his horse, he began to utter such maledictions and objurgations against those who were blanketing Sancho as it would be impossible to write down accurately. They, however, did not stay their laughter or their work for this, nor did the flying Sancho cease his lamentations, mingled now with threats, now with entreaties, but all of little purpose or none at all, until, from pure weariness, they left off. They then brought him his ass, and mounting him on top of it, they put his jacket round him, and the compassionate Maritornes, seeing him so exhausted, thought fit to refresh him with a jug of water, and that it might be all the cooler, she fetched it from the well. Sancho took it, and as he was raising it to his mouth, he was stopped by the cries of his master, exclaiming, "Sancho, my son, drink not water. Drink it not, my son, for it will kill thee. See, here I have the blessed balsam." And here he held up the flask of liquor. And with drinking 2 drops of it, thou wilt certainly be restored." At these words, Sancho turned his eyes asquint, and in a still louder voice said,
"Can it be your worship has forgotten that I am not a knight? Or do you want me to end by vomiting up what bowels I have left after last night? Keep your liquor in the name of all the devils, and leave me to myself."
And at one and the same instant he left off talking, and began drinking. But, as at the first sup he perceived it was water, he did not care to go on with it, and begged Maritornes to fetch him some wine, which she did with right good will, and paid for it with her own money, for indeed, they say of her that, though she was in that line of life, there was some faint and distant resemblance to a Christian about her. When Sancho had done drinking, he dug his heels into his ass, and the gate of the inn being thrown open, he passed out, very well pleased at having paid nothing, and carried his point, though it had been at the expense of his usual sureties, his shoulders. It is true that the innkeeper detained his alforjas in payment of what was owing to him, but Sancho took his departure in such a flurry that he never missed them. The innkeeper, as soon as he saw him off, wanted to bar the gate close, but the blanketers would not agree to it, for they were fellows who would not have cared 2 farthings for Don Quixote, even had he been really one of the knights errant of the Round Table. All right, let's get a bookmark here. Switch back to the other screen here. So, this has been our 3rd night of reading from Don Quixote. This has been full of rather painful lessons for our hero. It started off with the having to listen to the poetry of the deceased there, the goatherd who was scorned, and it didn't really go very well. That was some very interesting verse there. And then the very actually on-point complaints of Marcella, the shepherdess who was oh so beautiful. Like, all right, she can just keep on talking. Yes, it was a page-long paragraph, but she was right. It was fine. And then we continued on as he tried to follow her. And, wouldn't you know it, his old hack of a horse decided that it was time to try and have some fun. And that didn't go so well for him. Beaten and bruised, and then they found themselves at an inn. Laid up in the hayloft, barely even counts as lodgings, and beaten all to hell and back. Just set upon in the night over and over. Just a bad time all around. So far this seems to be about the end of most of Don Quixote's adventures, is battered, bruised, exhausted, and riding on for the next adventure. So we'll have to see whether the trend will continue when we return to this tomorrow. Our regularly scheduled readings, so far we are keeping to these as they are. I'm rather worse for wear at the moment, but we are keeping our schedule, by Jove. So we will be starting again tomorrow at 8 o'clock Eastern PM, the same time we started tonight. For those of you on YouTube, I would encourage you, implore you even, to drop a like on the stream, maybe a subscription to the channel. Let the algorithm there know that we're doing some fun things. Those of you on Twitch, we are new here. Let me know if there's anything I can do a little bit more in line with how Twitch does things. We've been on YouTube for about a year, and now we're branching out. As well, all of our VODs are on the YouTube channel. So, find yourself over there sometime if you feel like it's worth catching up. We've got a lot of very good classics there in the backlog. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up here for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be trying to raid again. We're kind of over 2 on that, but now we're up to 5 followers. And so maybe that will get us up to the threshold that it will let me do a raid. We'll see. So let's see who is out and about. Somebody's doing beta reading. Let's try that. Oh, yeah, hey, okay. So we are on our way. So, thank you very much for joining us. And until next time, guys, we will be back.
fun ways to work around rules. Best way to go, Salty. The people that play by the rules are losers. They're the ones who are clearly putting shit around. We're all